Do you like beige stucco? Do you enjoy beige stucco to basically the exclusion of every other possible architectural style? Well then, I might just have the city for you. Today we're going to the capital of New Mexico to look at a city that's taken design standards to an extreme, and along the way, we'll talk about the preservation of some of this country's most historic buildings, the value of a unified aesthetic experience, and how those things attract people to the city. And we'll get into the city's housing crunch, parking, walkability, and of course, trains. It's a visit to Santa Fe, a very different kind of US city, and it's coming up next. This is CityNerd, weekly content on cities and transportation. Viewer-suggested topics always welcome, but this one is really just me getting on a train I can walk to from my current home base and riding 60 miles northeast. A little geographic context. Santa Fe is a separate metro area apart from Albuquerque, and it's a city of around 100,000 that draws millions of visitors every year. The city is kind of linear, or really, it almost looks kind of like a horse's head, where downtown is the eye at the northeast end, or maybe I'm just weird. This development pattern makes it kind of interesting from a transportation perspective, but today we are mostly just going to be looking at downtown. What's special about Santa Fe is it really does ooze history in a way that maybe no other US city really does. So let's just start with Exhibit A, the Palace of the Governors, right on the city's central plaza. It dates from 1610, so 166 years before the founding of the United States. It was originally the Capitol building and seat of government for the Spanish imperial province of Nuevo Mexico, and it was rehabilitated in the early 1900s, around the time of New Mexico's admission to the Union in 1912, and it served as the State History Museum from then on. But the renovation of this building really became the basis for the architectural styles and design standards that are synonymous with the Santa Fe that we all know today. And the Palace of the Governors isn't the only early 17th century structure in the city. The San Miguel Church dates from around 1610 as well. It's also adobe construction, and it too is very influential on the look and feel of the whole city. While we're here, we can't really overlook the supposed oldest house in the USA. I'm not confirming or denying the veracity of this claim. I'm just reading signs. It's 2023, there's really no such thing as objective reality anymore, so just do your own research. Anyway, I didn't go in, but I believe it's a good source for refrigerator magnets and license plates that have your name embossed on them. These historic structures are the basis for the city's look and feel, which is Spanish Pueblo revival. Now, I'm not an architect, I don't even try to play one on TV, but it is worth understanding a few of the details of the style. The vigas, which are the rough exposed beams that extrude through the supporting walls. The canales, which are the rain spouts cut into the parapet walls along the flat roofs of the buildings. And of course, the earth-toned look of the old adobe exteriors. In 1957, the city passed an ordinance requiring that new and renovated buildings had to have a Spanish territorial or Pueblo style of architecture that harmonized with the remaining historic structures. So most of what you see today isn't actually adobe, but more modern construction methods with an earth-toned stucco surface. When people aren't being nice, they call this faux adobe. So Santa Fe has branded itself as the city different, and it's easy to be cynical about city nicknames, but this one actually does date from around the time the city decided to fully lean into this unique style. And differentiating yourself is something all cities try to do. It's how they compete on tourism, economic development, and attracting investment. And for Santa Fe, that shows up in tourism numbers, but also the number of wealthy people who relocate here. Remember, Santa Fe and Albuquerque are just 60 miles apart. So housing affordability is a problem to the point where on November 7th this year, local voters approved a 3% tax on the sale of houses over $1 million, which is maybe more of the housing stock than you'd expect, with the proceeds going towards affordable housing initiatives. Like, you don't have to walk around downtown very long to realize how many storefronts are occupied by real estate and mortgage offices, mostly in the Spanish Pueblo revival style, which is kind of a meta commentary on the symbiotic relationship between stringent design standards and a molten hot housing market. So let's talk about how Santa Fe has used Spanish revival architecture to supercharge tourism and the local economy, for better or worse. I do have to include the Cathedral Basilica of St. Francis of Assisi, which dates from the late 1800s and has more of a Romanesque style, but they did manage to include some Moorish arches, probably quoting the Mosque Cathedral of Cordoba, which I did visit earlier this year, although I'm not sure the Moorish Empire ever secured a foothold in the American Southwest. So here's how design requirements play out in the historic downtown. You can see how these arcaded retail buildings really reference the Palace of the Governors, sometimes pretty literally, sometimes more figuratively, sometimes with turquoise. We'll talk a little bit more about turquoise later in the video. But it would be hard to argue this hasn't been successful. I've been up to Santa Fe a few times now, and it is always bustling, and there are practically no vacancies along the street frontage. Well, except maybe here. I guess design standards don't include the construction of doorways for people who are over like 5'10". But even the little dated seeming shopping malls that are sprinkled throughout downtown seem to run at full occupancy, which is wild to me. And as you might expect, the city is loaded with fine dining options. Okay, maybe fine is taking it a bit far, but same kinds of buildings, even what looks like a repurposed service station. You get the idea that the people who can afford to live here eat out a lot. Plenty of cuisines represented, and definitely a lot of New Mexican, which I do adore, and you can even learn to cook Santa Fe style here. Although it has to be said, everyone has their limit, and sometimes you have a craving for other quality American regional cuisine. A lot of the storefronts seem to be designed around selling items that people can fill their million-dollar homes with. The hundreds of art galleries are no exception, and I don't think downtown Santa Fe is even the hot spot for this kind of activity. There's an entire gallery row out on Canyon Road east of downtown, which I'm not even including here. Full disclosure, I myself am not a huge buyer or even probably understander of the visual arts, but you can definitely say the galleries of Santa Fe do cover a wide variety of tastes. Related, let's hit the museums, which may be the most grandiose examples of Spanish Pueblo revival. Well, maybe except for the hotels, which I will get to. The History Museum moved out of the Palace of the Governors and into new digs. The art museums are pretty fantastic, and I do think it's fair to say that on a per capita basis, New Mexicans are disproportionately represented in the American pantheon. It's really every building though. The Convention Center, the Performing Arts Center, gift shops. Look, it's not just refrigerator magnets and miniature embossed license plates. Year-round Christmas shops are a thing here, and sometimes a person just really needs a cow skull. I didn't stop to ask if these are real because I was afraid of the answer. Jewelry shops. So look, I've got some bad news for you. If you're not a fan of turquoise, and I mean the color or the mineral, this city is probably going to be migraine inducing. Not only can you not walk a single block without running into a jewelry display, the color is incorporated into a lot of the building exteriors, probably the only non-earth tone that's permitted. Also, there is a whole vibe around the way people dress here, and there's no shortage of like boot and hat purveyors if you want to fit in. Alright, we absolutely have to talk about the hotels. The exteriors do conform to the required architectural style, and they're kind of hulking and impressive in their own way. Similar in scale to the museums, taking up entire city blocks, usually with storefronts along the exterior, but with kind of grandiose interiors with their own distinctive feel as well. Spacious restaurants and common areas, and lots of high-end amenities, souvenir penny flattening, custom dog portraits. It's really every building here though. Downtown offices of all kinds, lots of what I assume are wealth management companies, given the local demographics. It really doesn't matter what kind of business it is though. Nobody gets to break the rules. Bikes, fishing, cacti. Public buildings are no exception, or co-working spaces. Even bank drive-thrus are transformed into super authentic Pueblo structures. Some of this does border on the absurd, but the reality is, Santa Fe is a historic place, and they're gonna make darn sure you don't forget it. Everything has to adhere to the design standards, and I do mean everything. Is it all a bit much? Well, I'm gonna come back to that question. But first, a brief reminder to click on all the relevant screen elements, if you're so inclined. Or don't, whatever you think is best. Follow on the apps, especially if you're looking for bonus cat content. And Patreon is a great way to directly support everything I'm doing if you're enjoying it and if you want to keep seeing more of it. Okay, I want to talk about transportation a bit here. So first, let's acknowledge that if you've been looking at the scenes I've been showing you with a critical eye, you'll have noticed that there are just a lot of cars everywhere and you probably haven't seen a single bus. Well, here's one, just for completeness. But yeah, the transit system is not robust. So if you want to do the Santa Fe Margarita Trail and try 40 of the city's finest agave-based beverages, you're probably going to be driving. Unrelated, did you know New Mexico is #1 in the nation in pedestrian traffic fatalities? So this is a city that, despite its kind of artsy and progressive leanings, still relies heavily on parking. If you didn't notice from what I've shown you so far, there's basically on-street metered parallel parking everywhere, and it's kind of sad and ironic because the buildings and the streetscapes themselves, dare I say the urban fabric, are basically the entire charm of Santa Fe, but half the time you want to take a nice photo for Instagram, the thing you're taking a picture of is obstructed by some huge pickup truck. I've got to be honest, I've done kind of a 180 on on-street parking since I started really thinking a lot about this stuff. There's this whole school of thought that on-street parking is good for the walking environment because, among other things, it provides a buffer from the noise and the danger of street traffic. But now I just think that logic is kind of backwards. There are a lot more direct ways to deal with the negative impacts of vehicular traffic. And the city does have some car-free spaces. Burro Alley, two of the facing streets on the Central Plaza, including the one fronting the Palace of the Governors, quaint Spanish-style courtyards that exist at the center of some of the blocks downtown. And it's not as if the city doesn't have other ways of dealing with the storage of private vehicles. There's structured parking and surface parking, which somehow they've managed to do in Spanish Pueblo revival. I mean, I don't know if this parking garage attendance booth is the right material or texture, but the color tone is on point. Okay, let's take a break from earth tones and take a look at something else Santa Fe is doing that has a much more modern look and feel to it, and that's the Rail Yards District. All of the development here was coordinated with the construction of the terminus of the New Mexico Rail Runner alignment, which runs from the southern suburbs of Albuquerque through tribal lands and right to the edge of downtown Santa Fe. Here's the master plan from 2002, and honestly, this is one where the artist's rendering actually ends up looking pretty darn close to what they actually ended up building. A multimodal, pedestrian-friendly space with lots of commercial, but retaining an industrial feel to it. It's a lot of car-free space with a multi-use path that ends up stretching for basically the entire rail runner alignment through the city. What they might not have planned for was shared operation with the Sky Railway, which I believe is at least partly owned by Santa Fe's most famous resident. And I myself have not yet patronized the Sky Railway, but after browsing the website, I'm sorry to tell you, I think there's gonna have to be a forthcoming video. Also, if it wasn't abundantly clear yet, people here like to partake. So it's expensive to live in Santa Fe, but with the advent of the Rail Runner, the city is a lot more accessible for people to visit, even if they can't afford to live here. And probably more importantly, for people who don't live there to staff all the restaurants, hotels, and turquoise shops. Maybe not the most efficient way to address a housing crunch, but it is a service that gives you access right into the core of the city. But I don't know, people have to get used to walking, at least those that are able. Too many people getting off the train and calling an Uber to go like half a mile to their hotel. And I just increasingly wonder about this when I see recent headlines. Like maybe that Pixar movie about trash collecting robots on a basically uninhabitable Earth wasn't that far off, and we're just a decade or so away from all of us hovering around sedentary in our little pods, eating food and staring at our phones. Sorry to get dark. It is a pretty walkable city, but even given that, I was sitting at the hotel bar one night and the patrons next to me were asking the bartender how far away a certain restaurant was. And he said, it's 4 blocks, but they're short blocks, so it's walkable. Like, the fact that you even have to caveat 4 blocks, I don't know. I guess I better pre-order my personal hovercraft. You know, there used to be an entire major railroad named for this city, and now the Amtrak just completely passes it by. In fact, the loss of passenger rail in Santa Fe in the early part of the 20th century is one of the main things that got the city to go all in on tourism and distinctive architecture as its big differentiator. Now it's 100 years later and rail is back. You can literally take the train right into the heart of Santa Fe and walk just about everywhere you want to go. I just wish more people actually did that instead of renting a car at the Albuquerque International Sunport and driving up, because as much as I enjoy Santa Fe, it would be so much prettier and more pleasant to walk around if there were like half as many cars. It's ironic, the city works hard to maintain a Spanish colonial veneer, but if you go to actual Spanish cities, their most bustling, popular areas are pedestrian-only streets or low-traffic streets with no parking. So my thought is, if you're gonna go in on 17th century urban design, why not just go all the way with it? In the United States, that really would make you the city different. And that's all I've got. Thanks for joining, and thanks as always to the patrons who give me the freedom to change it up and keep you guessing every week. More city visits on the horizon, but I'm gonna keep the destination list under wraps for now. Keep the great topic suggestions coming. I'll be back with a new episode next week, and I'll see you then.